look up at their line arrays, right? And so they'll have a big, tall line array, and it's kind of curves at the bottom of PA speakers. And if you look just behind the line array, there's a bunch of other boxes, kind of fatter, and they're about 5 feet behind the main line array. Those are all the subs. And they're exactly 5 feet behind, kind of like what I was saying.
Yeah.
And they're using multiple subs to even out the so it's not just one sub.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of them that even out that frequency response way down low.
You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hey folks, welcome to the Inside the Mix podcast, and a welcome back if you are a returning listener or viewer if you're watching this on YouTube. Today, I say today, or rather in this episode, it is today I guess, I'm thrilled to introduce my guest, Mike Dow, one half of the podcast Mics on Mics. Mike, how are you? And thank you for joining me today.
Doing well, thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm okay. I was just saying off air that I'm at the tail end of a cold, which seems to be sweeping its way through the UK at the moment. And I'm better now. There might be a few episodes. This is coming out in December. A few episodes in November where it sounds like my voice is deeper than it usually is, purely because of that. Maybe I should go. What's that? Where you can move into? Oh, come on, it's Headspace. There's the Headspace app where you provide and you talk to people and they fall asleep. Hopefully they don't do that with the podcast, but like a soothing voice when it gets deeper. Yeah, put myself out of a job there if I'm saying that when I'm talking, people are falling asleep. Anyway, so a bit about Mike. He's a seasoned audio expert who's been in love with amps, speakers, and the magic of sound since he started lugging gear around at the age of 12. Man, I've been there. After nearly 4 decades, he's still just as hooked. So today, or rather in this episode, we're diving into speaker calibration and why the idea of a flat speaker may not be as ideal as it seems. Now, this is a topic that I've not covered on the podcast before, so this is new territory again. We're doing this a lot in the podcast in this latter part of 2024, what with Dolby Atmos and now with speaker calibration. So it's exciting stuff. So I thought if we could kick off with the basics. For those who might be new to the concept, could you tell our audience what speaker calibration is and why it's so critical for achieving accurate sound in a mix?
Gosh, it's so hard. It's going to be hard to do without visuals, but let's go on a little journey together.
Let's do it.
So you're sitting. The first time you listen to, say, a record or a CD or whatever, you're sitting in front of your parents' stereo, and you're listening. And at some point, if you're like me, you wonder, hey, is this what it sounded like when they were actually mixing this? Is this what it sounded like when the guys mastered it at the recording studio? How was my experience here in my living room different from that? And like, how far off is it? I can certainly hear all the instruments, but like, how clear are they? And what is right? What's correct? So you start with, well, you have to have a signal. You have to have a signal that's known to everybody, that is sort of agreed upon as this is your baseline. And so a lot of people use what they call pink noise. And if you have pink noise that is correctly made pink noise playing through a system, and the system can be anything. It can be from start to finish, soup to nuts, from your CD player, I'm dating myself there, all the way out to your speakers, but also including your room, because your room is part of the system. And this is something a lot of people, I'm going to get way ahead of myself here, but a lot of people don't really understand is when you make a sound with a speaker in a room, it's a lot like plucking a string on a guitar, and that the string is the speaker and the guitar, the resonating body of that guitar, I'm talking about an acoustic guitar, but also electric, but mainly acoustic, is the room.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're activating all of the fundamentals of that room and the reverberation and everything that happens within that. So where am I going with all this? If you look at pink noise in an electric system, and you're just electronically coming in through a mixer or whatever, and you come out and everything's perfect, then it looks flat. So what does that mean? Well, that means that you're looking at one end of picture one end of a two-dimensional space, XY graph, and along the x-axis is your frequencies, and you're starting on the left side with 20 hertz, and on the right side, all the way at the end at 20,000 hertz. That's because us as humans, that's kind of where we can hear things. And then the up and down, the y-axis, is obviously the magnitude, sometimes measured in decibels. And that is a flat line if you're looking at it electronically. If your pink noise is actually how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think, well, golly, this is an easy one, Mike. This will be a very short conversation. You want your speaker to look like that when you're playing it in your room. And I will tell you, I've done it, and it sounds horrible. The highs are way too much. The lows are not enough. And one thing that really made me realize that I wasn't just going crazy is there is a standard, and it's a standard in the motion picture industry, or the Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers. Some people call that SMPTE, and recommended practice 201 and 202 when you were playing back pink noise from one of their channels, the left main or the center or the right main or the surround, and you put a measurement microphone within the room, the theater in this case, it is not flat. In fact, they don't want it to be flat. Now, throughout the mid-range, and I say mid-range, from about 160 hertz all the way up to about 2000 hertz, it is flat. But at about 2000 hertz, it tends to drop off. And then it drops off even more at I want to say 10K. I'd have to look at it. And then even down below, it drops off a little bit. Now, whenever you add in your LFE, your low frequency effects, or some people in the music world would call that their sub, it's about 10 decibels higher. And it's from 160 hertz on down to 20 hertz. So you have kind of this roller coaster looking curve. That is the standard curve for every theater in the world, and it was kind of crazy for me to see that. It's called the X curve. So you take that and you're like, okay, well then, Mike, what is the standard for left and right stereo for studios? And I'm going to say there's not one. In fact, there's a whole class, or I guess not even just a class, but really a whole industry of what they call system optimization. So say you go to, I'm going to choose Dave Matthews because he's one of my favorites. Go to one of his concerts. You're going to have a guy that all he does is set up the system, the PA, with his favorite little curve for the concert. So it's not, when you go to a Dave Matthews concert, I guarantee you it is not flat. Now, what does it look like? It depends, but usually it's a rough guesstimation of that X curve, and that's what I've seen. You're rolling off your highs a little bit, and you have a lot in the lows, depending on what kind of music it is. But I hope that's not too much information and that it came across okay. You have any questions?
Yeah, that's a fantastic and very comprehensive description. Very, very good. And I really liked the use of the guitar and the string to sort of depict or describe how the sound works in a studio, because it's going to color the sound, isn't it? How you're treated, how your studio is treated, is going to have color on that. And
Sure.
You see that a lot in discussion online with regards to one of the first things you should really think about when it comes to production and mixing in particular is, before you go out and buy XYZ plugins and whatever, you should probably think about your room itself, because that's going to have a color, and it's going to color your sound. So what you mentioned there about the guitar and the guitar string and the resonating body is a really, really good way of sort of imagining what the sound from the speakers is doing in what is essentially your studio setup, which I think is great.
Mhm.
One question I do have, you mentioned pink noise
Yes.
being created correctly. What is the counter to that? What experience have you got of incorrect pink noise?
So I haven't tested it lately, but probably about 5 years ago, I'm in Pro Tools. And they have the built-in signal generator. So you can go to their little audio suite drop down. And within there, you can make tone and pink noise and all sorts of other things. So you think, this is great. I'll just grab some of this pink noise, and it's got to be flat because, this is Pro Tools. They know what they're doing. So I did that when I was going to tune a room. That's what or optimize a system for a room for our sound mixing. That's kind of what I did at the time I was working there. So I did it. And then we went and measured it again afterwards, and it was weird. And so, long story short, I dug through, hey, well, how come this doesn't match, what I did in Pro Tools? Anyway, I ended up measuring the pink noise straight out of Pro Tools, and it is supposed to be a flat line, but it is not. It looks like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just a bumpy, a caterpillar with maybe about 3 backs.
Wow.
It just kind of woo all the way.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to, but it was not correct. And so I thought, oh, well, then I can't trust anybody. So one of the ways that you correct for a room, if you're going to optimize a room or a system or a PA or whatever, is you usually stick a DSP, digital signal processor, on the output of whatever you're mixing out of. Now, can you do it in your board on your master outs? Yeah, you can. And then you got to remember that you don't want those to go to your final record. So they're, and you have to keep track of all this stuff. Whereas if you keep these two things separate, it costs a little more money, but then you never really have to think about it. Once it's corrected for your room, you don't have to worry, wait, I mixed it, but I forgot to bypass the EQ that was on my final output, because some people will do it in the DAW. There's some plugins that'll let you do that, but, it's always a trade-off. So anyways, these digital signal processors as well, they have pink noise generators in them. And London Blue 100s are a pretty well-known digital signal processor, and their pink noise is great. It is, I would say, near perfect. And even the pink noise that comes straight from Dolby, their main pink noise wave file that you can download if you look hard enough, I don't think it's perfect, but it's real close. And so then the question is, well, hey, Mike, how do you know what's perfect? And what are you measuring? Maybe your measuring device is wrong. Well, it may be, but the measuring device that I use is a combination of hardware and software. The software is driven by a company called Rational Acoustics, makes smart software. It lets you measure not only the spectrum, but the magnitude. That one's it lets you measure a lot of things.
Yeah.
Mainly the spectrum is what we care about, especially when we're system optimizing for theaters. So back to the DSPs. So Blue 100's good. Pro Tools is bad. And then Biamp makes an amazing DSP. But their pink noise is not correct. They have the same kind of caterpillary humps in their pink noise as well. And so the lesson here isn't like, oh, are these guys, do they not know what they're doing no, it's none of that. It has everything to do with just check what you're doing first. Make sure that the pink noise that you're using, whether it's a wave file somebody gave you, measure it with your measuring device first, and then, just confirm. That's the advice that I have about pink noise.
Yeah, so you really want to check the source is reputable, ideally. And if you get it from somewhere, like you mentioned there about Dolby, for example, you'd like to think that is a reputable. Saying that, Avid you would like to think would be a reputable source, but
right,
have you got any reason why you think it might be that it's not quite correct? I'll put you on the spot here a bit. Why why it's not quite creative? Is it an afterthought? Is it something that you think they haven't put much care and attention into?
So yeah, sure. I'll shoot from the gut on this with zero research. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that maybe the software that they wrote to create the pink noise was written a long time ago, when maybe they didn't have as powerful processors, and they said, rough guesstimation, who's going to check this? And it just kind of lived with them for forever through all the versions up to now. That's what I would guess.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I use I use Logic Pro as a staple DAW, and I do use the pink noise there from time to time, but I've got a separate pink noise file that I use. I cannot remember where I got it from, but I'm fairly confident it was a reputable source. But so when I've done the calibration in my studio here, I've used that, and I've got good results out of it. But I know exactly what you mean. I have heard and I've seen different things online. That's the thing with the amount of resources available online. You've got to make. I think it's with any. It's with any. I remember when I was doing my degree, and like when you're getting references, you're always told make sure it's from a reputable source. Right. So I think it's across the board, isn't it? No matter what you do, you kind of want to make sure. It's that phrase again, isn't it? Reputable source.
The great thing here is if you're using Smart or some software to measure it, then you can check it immediately. You can just pull the file straight in and go, well, that's weird. That's not straight and flat like it's supposed to be, or great, okay, that's good. I mean, it doesn't matter if some kid off the street made it, or if you got it from Dolby themselves or Symmetry themselves. As long as it's straight when you're going in, you know that's the signal you need to be using coming out.
And for our audience listening, are you checking that in sort of a frequency analyzer? Are you checking that?
Right. Yes, the spectrum analyzer in Smart lets you see that XY plot that we imagined earlier with the 20 hertz on the left of the screen and the 20 kilohertz on the right of the screen, and then the magnitude of the up and down Y part of the axis.
I've been using a frequency analyzer I found for free of late, so this is a bit of a plug here, and it's by TDR, and it's called the TDR Prism, which I highly encourage if you want to get one for free and try it out. Their TDR Nova is great, and TDR Kotelnikov compressor is great as well, but Prism is a fantastic frequency spectrum analyzer, which way you want to call it, and do go check that one out. This is just a little shout out for that one there. This is great stuff, Mike. As I say, this is totally new for the podcast. So I've done calibration and bits and pieces, but I've never gone into this sort of detail, which is great. So I've got another question for you here.
Let me jump on the back thing that you just said, though. If you're looking for a free frequency analyzer, another good one is REW, which I think stands for Room EQ Wizard. And it's been open source for a long time, and hobbyists and home recording studios and hi-fi people who really get into their hi-fi, they use this a lot. It has a lot of the same things that Smart has in it, but it runs a little slower, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but that is definitely one that people have looked to use as well. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, because that's what I use myself, REW, when I take room measurements, and it is a fantastic piece of kit. If you do it, there is a set of tutorial videos which I highly encourage you to watch, because it can be a bit of a steep learning curve to get it set up. If I remember rightly when I was doing it. So, audience listening, REW, but make sure you watch the tutorial videos for it. Don't go in there blind, because I think you'll lose faith quite quickly. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. You will need a measurement mic to go with it as well. I can't remember which one. I think I've got a Bayer Dynamic one. That's around here somewhere. But
so let's go on a little tangent on measurement mics. So
yes,
because it's all about the signal coming back into your computer. So it really doesn't matter, because when I had the training on this, we actually hired the Smart guys to come out and show us how to use their software. And so he said, you can buy $100 versions, you can buy $1,000 microphones. I have a couple of Earthworks M23s, which are pretty nice. And they come with little calibration files, because they're not perfectly flat. So there's these files that you add to them that says, this is what the corrections are, so that it will read perfectly flat. If you are going through your entire system, I know it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. You don't want it. You just said you don't want it perfectly flat, but let's just say you start with your perfectly flat pink. What you do comes out of your speakers, and for some reason you have EQ'd them perfectly flat. Then this microphone in that room would probably read perfectly flat. So that's what I mean. Those are Earthworks, but then you can get your hands on some Behringers or Presonus or whatever. They're like a little over $100, and the thing is, they're not that much different. And that being said, I bought a couple of very cheap Presonus reference mics, and because I had the Earthworks microphones, I used those to create correction files for basically I said, all right, this one's supposed to be perfectly flat. All right, let's take this one that's unknown, and I'm never going to get a correction file for it. And what should it be? And in the software of Smart, you can invert what you're getting from it, and then you use that as the correction file for that particular microphone. So you can use one expensive microphone, to make it look like you have lots of really expensive microphones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very good stuff there with the measurement microphones. And whilst you were talking there, I love the fact that you created your own what is essentially a calibration file, which is so cool. The microphone I was mentioning, it's not Better Dynamic, it's Behringer ECM 8000.
Yeah,
that's the one I've got, and it's just a cheap one, but it does the job.
Fine.
And I managed. It took me a while to find the calibration file on the internet. I had to do some digging for that and make sure I didn't download it from some dodgy website.
Yeah, well,
but I managed to get it. Yeah.
Well, and I started a story and I didn't really finish it. So I bought these little Presonus microphones and I made correction files for them. But I want to say I bought 4 of them. That's what I did. And I put them all in, and I turned on the pink noise and everything. And 4 of them, they looked pretty close. They were pretty similar, and they were pretty similar to the Earthworks. And one of them was way off. And so I posted to my little group on the Facebook. And I was like, one of these things doesn't look like the other. And immediately I got a guy from Presonus. He's like, hey, please send that back and we'll just send you a new one.
Yeah.
So
that's
every once in a while, the cheap guys. So
that's quite scary, isn't it? Because you think to yourself, you get this microphone. I think you can get it with any hardware. Ultimately, you are at the mercy of the engineering that's gone into it. And for the most part, you like to think it's done correctly, or the idea is that they perceive they've done it correctly, but we're only human. If that's been manually put together, we get mistakes.
Exactly. I just imagine somebody.
Think of it, do you?
Right. Somebody's on the assembly line, while that microphone's being made, they sneezed, and that microphone didn't get the resistor that it needed or something, and it just snuck on by.
Yeah.
I still have that microphone because I know what it looks like, and I'm like, gosh, whenever I need a drum recording and I want a little more low end than I should have, I'm going to use that microphone,
Yeah, I was just going to say there that it could result in you getting this incredible sounding microphone that sounds
exactly
like it's so unique. There's no other one out there like it, purely on the basis that someone's made an error, which is the wonders of music production in itself, Mike, I've got a question here I'd like to move on to.
Sure.
And it's with regards to calibration in a new space. So we've mentioned about pink noise and how we're using that to calibrate our speakers and whatnot. So what are some of the key factors you consider when calibrating your setup? You're in a new space. How does room size, layouts, or even the type of monitors you're using impact your calibration approach?
Okay, so there are people out there who are much better than me, but I'm going to go back to the Dolby guys, and they say that pointing your speakers and speaker placement, I think, is the most important thing. And then there's 3 other things after that, which I've kind of forgotten. But I can tell you what I go through is I look at the space, and are the walls hard? Is there any treatment on the walls and the ceiling and the floor? And how symmetrical is the space? So let's say you had a room that's 10 feet tall by 10 feet long by 10 feet wide. Well, then whatever frequency happens at 10 feet is going to just build up like a mother
Yeah.
in that room. And there's no amount of EQ you can do that's going to get rid of it. So looking at the space as, again, a chamber that reverberates, like going back to that guitar body, just kind of think about, okay, the more something that is less, that's not sympathetic to a certain frequency. So they're used to, and you can go down rabbit holes with this. So there's people who say, here's the golden ratio for rooms, and just Google it. And if you can start from scratch by building a room that has different dimensions for the length, width, and height, then go look it all up on the Googles. They'll tell you all the things you need to know about avoiding building up certain frequencies. But the main deal there is just, even if it's 10 by 10 by 10, that's the worst case scenario, or 12 by 12 by 12 if they're all the same. But you also don't want to do a double or a half. So if it's 10 by 10 by 20, that's just as bad. 10 by 10 by 30, just make sure that they're all kind of different.
Yeah, you kind of want an asymmetrical room there, don't you? You want the different measurements on the length, width, and height to help with that.
Right.
And yeah, I've been anytime I've gone to have a look at a studio premises, it's the first thing I look at is the length, height, and width of the room, and I don't want them to be equal.
Right.
So a few questions with regards to sort of like placement in a room. With regards to the monitor position, say you're in a rectangular room. Is it wise to put the monitors facing the widest length of the room, if that makes sense? So
typically that's what I've seen. Now, it's all different, right? There may be a reason for you to do it the other way, because let's face it. So I work at a university, and studios are not really made to teach people. It's not a classroom, but you kind of want it to be that way. So there may be a reason that you want to build a room that can house a bunch of students, and in kind of a wide sort of format, and not in the studio sort of format. It's because, what are you doing at the end of the day? But let's just say, for argument's sake, we didn't care about students, and we just want the best studio ever made. It would probably be along the length, what you're talking about. You want your speakers shooting down the longest way of the room. And that's the way I've seen it done. I don't know that I've really put a ton of thought into why, but just about all over the world, that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, and it's what I've researched whenever I've gone down the rabbit hole of sort of room setups and whatnot, and with regards to the speaker position, and then have them the listener at a third of the length of the room. And I mean, I was on the floor with tape measures working out to the nth degree in terms of doing that. One question I do have for you, and I say a lot, but I see pictures online of people who have home studios, and obviously with regards to home studios, you are at the mercy, the limits of what space you have. But monitors positioned with the backs directly against the wall, and I see that happen a lot. And my understanding is that you don't want that. You need to have space between the rear of the monitor and the wall. What are your thoughts on that?
What's happening there is, when you put the monitor closer to the wall, you're adding up a bunch of low end. That's kind of the deal that's happening there. And experiment with this. Take your monitors and put them out in the middle of the room and kind of listen and see what they sound like. And if you had them on wheels, just to wheel them around just to see what happens, even better. Play with it. See what happens when you move that speaker monitor closer to the wall or closer to the corner. And so basically the more big flat surfaces that you put behind a speaker, the more the low end is going to build up. So let's say you bought a real cheap speaker, and you're like, man, the low end, it's just not there. Like, 60 hertz and below, it's just, it really needs a lot of help. In that case, maybe it's a good idea to move closer to the wall or closer to a corner or closer to the floor corner where you actually have, because when you go to a corner, that's 2 walls. But then if you go to the down in the floor corner, well, that's 3 walls, and you're really boosting bass at that point, right? So it's sort of the poor man's way to EQ your room by pushing your speakers forward and back. And you're sort of tuning your speaker to your room in a very analog way.
Yeah, it's almost quite, I hate to use the term, but it's quite a crude way of EQing your room, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think for the audience listening, you also need to be wary of, again, this goes back to what I said earlier about coloring your mix with regards to your, so I think a key thing would be to run really high quality recordings through it, so you get an idea of what it should sound like,
right?
And before you start working on your own mixes through that. But we're approaching the end here, and I've got, these do go very fast, I find, these chats.
That's all right.
So I've got a question, and I think this is particularly useful for our audience listening, and it kind of develops what I asked just then, really. For our listeners working in home studios or smaller spaces, we've mentioned this, do you have any practical tips on how they can start calibrating their speakers effectively without breaking the bank? So we've already mentioned about the sort of crude method of EQing. Maybe we could rephrase this question with this. What would be, you've just set up your studio, what would be the single most important thing you would do in terms of treatment or positioning to kickstart your calibration?
Treatment's going to be, you're going to throw some things on the wall. You're going to throw it up there and hope it sticks, right? Like people are going to do what they're going to do. You kind of have what you have. If you can treat them, great. Same with the speaker placement. At some point, it's sort of like you're kind of stuck with what you got. Now, you can move them around and try different things. But at some point, it's like, well, this was the extra room in my house, and that's what I have. But if I had anything to say to start with, I'd say get yourself a good set of near fields. If that's what you're going to mainly be mixing through, get a sub. Get a sub, because your near fields are not going to be able to handle that low end. And when you do get a sub, you're going to need to time align it with that low end. Now, and what this means, I'm going to say something that the guys usually say, who tune these, is you push the sub back about 4 or 5 feet, because at about 160 hertz, that sort of puts in phase where your crossover would be, which is about 160 hertz, 125 hertz. You can go a little lower than that if you want, but that's again where movie theaters do it, and so it's not a bad idea. So I say push it back. Well, you're like, hey, I have this tiny room that I'm mixing in. I don't have room. I don't have 5 feet to push a sub back. What are you talking about, Mike? Well, that's where your DSP comes into play. If you delay something 5 milliseconds, that is the equivalent of moving it back in space about 5 feet, because sound moves at about 1 foot per 1 millisecond is about how far sound would, golly, I just messed that all up. Think about 1 foot, and that's 1 millisecond. That's the best way to think of it.
Yeah.
So when you move it back 5 feet, then you've just delayed it 5 milliseconds. There we go.
Yeah. Getting a sub, I highly recommend that. And I appreciate the audience. You might not be in a position where your neighbors would appreciate you having a sub, but it does make... It does make a big difference, I find. Years ago when I first got a sub, and I was just like, why haven't I done this before?
Right.
And in terms of everything that I've done thereafter. And I remember when I was setting it up and I was crawling around on the floor, moving it about, doing various tests at 80 to 85 dB, timelining everything. It took a bit of while to dial it in and get it right, but it's really worth doing.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. You know, when you start trying to make a tighter low end with your sub, you're going to end up with bass traps and that kind of thing. But again, the Googles, they have all the answers. So good luck.
Yeah. There is a YouTube channel, and I cannot remember the name of it, but the chap's name is Jesco, and I'm really trying to get him on the podcast because I love his work. But that, audience listening, if you want to get some information on how to set up your room, just Google Jesco room treatment or something along those lines, Jesco.
Wow, okay, that's good.
Really,
stuff.
really good. Yeah, he's got freebies as well, so with regards to walkthroughs and other bits and pieces. But yeah, as I said, I'm trying to get him on the podcast hopefully in 2025. It'd be a good follow-up to this one. But yeah, a really good resource for the audience if they want to
one more fun thing about subs, this is a story that it's actually happened to me, is I've heard that more subs are better. So if you can get a couple of subs or 3 or 4 and they're working together and not against each other, then that will flatten out your frequency response of a room. So I'm over at somebody's house and I'm tuning their room and they have 2 subs. Well, it's weird because they have a place for one sub in the corner over here, and then the opposite corner, like completely diagonal, is where they want the other sub. And I'm like, what are you even? No. And so I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm listening to it, and it's just weird. And then I get to the point where I'm thinking, wait a second. What happens if I take this other sub in this other corner and I flip its polarity 180 degrees? So it's pulling when the other one's pushing, and the person in the middle is just getting all of the pull-push together. It's kind of like having a train engine on the front and the back of a bunch of cars, right? And where the cars are the air in the room. So I did that, and it flattened out, and it sounded amazing. So kind of by accident and kind of by trial and error, we turned that room into a really nice sounding room by using 2 subs, one to push and one to pull, and putting the listener right in the.
Wow, I would have never have thought to have more than one sub, because in my head, and you go with the thought process of it's a sub, it's one, you know, it's always referred to as an LFE or a sub. Right. So as soon as you add another one, in my head, I'm like, this is crazy, 2 subs, like madness, like what, a left and right? But now you've explained it, it does. And I think that's the beauty of music, isn't it? You can stumble across these, not fixes. Well, I guess it would be a fix in a way because it's flattening out the room. But you stumble across these things and you're like, oh, this is amazing. I never would have thought of doing it, which is the beauty of music production in itself, you know?
Well, and so one little piece of information to kind of make me feel like I do know what I'm talking about. The next time you're at a concert, look up at their line arrays. Right. And so they'll have a big, tall line array, and it's kind of curves at the bottom of PA speakers. And if you look just behind the line array, there's a bunch of other boxes, kind of fatter, and they're about 5 feet behind the main line array. Those are all the subs. And they're exactly 5 feet behind, kind of like what I was saying.
Yeah.
And they're using multiple subs to even out so it's not just one sub. Yeah. It's just a bunch of them that even out that frequency response way down low.
I never thought about that. I think live music oftentimes is a really good place. If you're ever unsure what you should be doing in a studio, just think of a live setting. And I've used this analogy before with regards to like mixing and pan positions of instruments. You're thinking, okay, if you're unsure where to put an instrument, just visualize the last gig you went to and think about where they're positioned on the stage.
That's right.
And in terms of how back and far back they are in particular as well. And
good
also
advice.
Mixing is and mixing as well. I remember I had Mike Exeter on the show a couple of years ago, and he said like one of the best ways to learn, really get your teeth into mixing, is to mix a live performance. It's a really good place to start.
That's always a good time.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I did it a few times and I was like, yeah, I prefer being in the studio. But it's good. I mean, there are many, I think what you mentioned there about the subs just highlights that. You can learn a lot from live sound and then take that into the studio, which I think is really, really good advice. And the next gig I go to, I'm going to keep out. I never look for the subs. I always look at the line arrays, and I'm like, oh, that's great. But I never think about what the subs are doing behind. But Mike, this has been brilliant. Absolutely great stuff. As I say, we never had this topic of conversation on the podcast before, so it's been great. I think this is an opportunity now. I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't give you the opportunity just to explain to our listeners a bit about mics on mics. I always trip myself up on that. And your show, what you're doing there.
Yeah, so it's just, we started it on YouTube, and I think we're going to put it on X. So Mike Nimitz and I basically sit around and talk about old synthesizers and music production, and we talk to people like you. You were on it, and people you know. It's just it's a good time to kind of hit the nostalgia, but also, hey, what are you doing these days with those synthesizers? And it's not much different from yours, although yours is kind of more this is how you do it, and ours is kind of like back in the day we did it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. It's great though. Audience, do go check it out. I will put a link in the episode show notes, so do go check out Mike's on Mike's and give them a follow as well on YouTube, or a subscribe, whatever it's called. And go check that out. And the episode that I'm on, I believe, promotion for myself here, would have dropped, because this episode is going to drop in December. So that one would have been around already. Maybe I'll put a link to that one in there as well.
Yeah, I think it comes out November. Your episode is going to release November 5th.
Cool. So it would have been out for almost a month.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Mike, as I say, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And a big thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. This was great.
Indeed. I know audience are going to get a lot out of this one. So, Mike, I'll leave you to carry on the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you soon. If you've enjoyed this episode, I want to hear from you. Click the link in the episode description. Click the SpeakPipe link and leave me a 30-second audio message. It doesn't have to be 30 seconds, but up to, detailing why you enjoyed this episode and why you would recommend it. And also, give yourself a shout out. And as an added bonus, each month I will draw a lucky winner from a virtual hat to win a coffee voucher on me. And if you don't like coffee, just give it to someone else and pretend you gave it to them. So, click the link in the episode description, and I cannot wait to hear your episode recommendations.